Hi, Veronica.
Hi, Pegor, how are you?
I'm good. I wanted to start by introducing you. So
Go
you're
for it.
a content developer and research manager at code.org. You've worked, among other things, on curriculum guidelines for TeachAI. You're a former teenager, just like me, but you also have a background in molecular and environmental biology. You've worked as a researcher, and you've been a teacher for a number of years in the Chicago public school system, which is amazing. And you have a master's degree in education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
At
And
least I
what
think so.
what do you know about me?
Well, I know that Pegor is the Chief Development Officer at the TUMO Center for Creative Technologies, which you helped to create. He has a varied background. He used to be an architect, then studied computer science at MIT, where he worked in the original MIT AI lab. He also has an MBA from the University of Chicago and has worked in software development, international development, and education.
Right. So I wanted to ask you about your work on Teach AI, and in particular on the guidelines you guys are developing for AI literacy, which is a very important topic these days. Um, so I'm really curious to know how you guys are approaching it.
Yeah. So we're working on an interdisciplinary framework, and we're doing this in partnership with a group of global experts across the field of computer science, learning design, education theory. And we're really hoping that with this partnership, we can reach teachers across different contexts and across different cultures. We want to do this by creating materials that go throughout the curriculum. So you might be able to feature lessons about AI literacy in your social studies class, along with your computer science class or your math learning experiences. We want to do that by creating really practical resources that educators can use right then and there. The biggest thing we hear from teachers is that there's not a lot of time and they're not really sure how to fit things in with their curriculum. So we want to make that as easy as possible for them. And we're also working to develop an international assessment on media and AI literacy to supplement and to really build more community in the space too.
And so is AI literacy mostly about understanding what AI is, how it can be used, or is it more about being able to defend yourself against the dangers of it? Is it where on the spectrum does the guideline fall?
Yeah, we really approach it from a technical standpoint as well as a human and societal impact standpoint. I think that, part of my work at code.org is enacting our mission that all students have the opportunity to learn computer science. And we really believe that having that technical understanding leads to a more holistic understanding of the ethical considerations and how it will impact people, because once you get kids working with data, thinking about the statistics behind machine learning models, they start to really consider what they had thought about it before and how it would fit into their lives going forward, which, if I'm not wrong, that's part of your work at TUMO as well, correct? The technical understandings.
That's right. And we also feel that uh, if you don't take control of your relationship with AI as a teenager, especially, which is the demographic we work with mostly, uh,
Mm,
it's really hard to make the right choices when it comes to defending your interests. And you run the danger of becoming a consumer and victimized as a consumer because it's in the interest of a lot of companies developing AI to commercialize that technology. And so we would like at least the kids we're working with to be very much super users of AI, very savvy about it,
mhm,
because yeah, otherwise you would retreat it into a mode where you're just being very defensive and run the risk of maybe widening the digital divide, especially in the kinds of countries we work with, some of which are very low income.
mm,
And so if between the fact that you are seen as a consumer, but by many of the people developing AI systems, and the fact that you're at this disadvantage to begin with in terms of resources you have, if you don't really take a proactive approach, like you're saying, of very deep enough technical knowledge about AI, then it's very hard to have a relationship with it that is in your interest, right?
mhm. Yeah, I totally agree.
And so one of the ways we look at it is the yes, we're all AI consumers and we should be savvy consumers. We should be literate about it. What we're seeing sometimes in policymakers is going towards two extremes. On one extreme, they go towards AI literacy understood as being cautious, being able to distinguish fakes and things like that, right? Very much a defensive approach. Or having a minimum level of literacy in terms of knowing what AI is, knowing what systems are out there. At the other extreme, you have, especially in countries like Armenia, where we work, governments focusing very much on creating AI engineers, right? So when talking about education, it's about making sure kids learn how to build neural networks and machine learning and linear algebra and things like that, which is very important, but it's probably important for a fairly small minority of the kids and is interesting for a small minority of students. And there's a big gap in between, which is about this kind of AI super user. When they say AI would not steal your job, what we like to say is some Armenian teenager who's the AI super user is going to steal your job. And that's what's going to make them competitive, but not necessarily in computer science. It's across the board. It could be super competitive in graphic design or medicine or whatever the case may be because they're AI super users. So that's kind of the approach in developing curricula. Yeah.
Right. I really love that framing because I think when we think about the future of work and career options for our students now, everyone's really like, no one really knows what to say. And I was talking to a teenager who was saying, I love computer science, but I don't know if I want to study this in college because I don't know that I'm going to get a job afterward. But I love how you're positioning it as no, as the student, this is going to be what you do. This is where you can really excel.
Right. And I'm curious about how code.org is thinking about, computer programming, computer science in general. Sometimes you hear people ranging from Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, to others saying, oh, you don't need to learn to code. Vibe coding works. I have a bunch of kids, 3 out of 5 are went into computer science and are kind of computer nerds. One of the other ones is now saying, oh, I can create applications just like you guys can. Why did you even study computer science? How are you guys approaching that in terms of the code.org mission?
Yeah, well, we absolutely believe that every student should learn to code, that it's still important to learn to code. And with AI in the picture now, it becomes, as we were just saying, a way to understand the technology and to harness your use in a better way. I think that, code.org is really about getting as many kids as possible to learn. And I think to that effect, vibe coding and these tools that make it really accessible are great for exercising creativity, putting your ideas into practice. I imagine it's great for, new fun projects or if a minimum viable project kind of thing. But I would hope that for a scale or for like a banking app or for security purposes that maybe the vibe coding stays in a more creative passion project area. I think it can be true that AI replaces the barriers to entry that computer science once presented, even as recently as 10 years ago for students getting involved in computer science. But it's also true that we still need experts who can troubleshoot that code and who can think about what they're, presenting to others and who can take context into account and, work with stakeholders to create good apps and good solutions.
But you guys are focused on bringing coding knowledge to a very wide range of students. And so you're not targeting the ones that are going to be creating, or only the ones that are going to be creating these like banking systems and so on that you're talking about. It looks like there's some thought about why everyone should learn computer science beyond the fact that because they're going to be software engineers, right?
Which is, we should all engage with creative thinking. We should all engage with refining our logical thinking patterns and structures, right? The way that computer language forces you to consider how you're communicating, what problems you're looking at, assessing whether you're really reaching those problems. The same thing with generating any piece of art. The same thing with writing any essays. There is a helpful productive struggle, and to show kids that this is another way of expressing themselves is really important. We are coming out with a new curriculum that is computer science AI fundamentals that's focused on rather than really high level software engineering, it's a more accessible way for students to learn computer science and to learn the fundamentals of AI, rather than waiting until their second year or however many units in the future. It's a really more focused, ready to learn type of thing for students to prepare them for life outside of high school, where they get the technical knowledge, the fundamentals as it applies to technology they're using in their everyday lives. So it presents kind of a middle ground, I think, too.
Yeah, yeah. And are schools in the US adopting these kinds of approaches? Is there widespread adoption? Is there a uniform adoption, or is it like everyone making up their own version?
It's hard. It's hard right now. I think you were saying this a little bit earlier with policy, where it can be very polarized, and a lot of teachers and district leaders don't really know what to do. I'll say that with TeachAI, we work with 44 out of 50 US states. We work with 31 government agencies. So we have dialogue across different like government education groups, to share best practices, and we've certainly helped them to develop good policies, but it really depends district to district. And in some cases, you'll have a math class where the teacher says, use AI to come up with a good answer to this word problem or to generate a new word problem for your classmates. But then down the hall, you'll have an English teacher who says, all of your essays have to be written by hand, no AI, no GPT, everything's happening in front of me where I can see it. And I think that it's kind of like what you're saying about playing defense. And when there isn't consistent messaging and consistent language about what AI is and what it can do, that people are not sure how to even present it for younger learners. So I think that's where a key aspect of my work is helping teachers to continue to learn about this and empower them to provide that consistent messaging and good skills for students.
And the fact that you mentioned, for example, creating AI, international AI literacy assessment, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
With AI changing so fast, is there some constants you guys have identified, or are you just revising them very, very often?
Yeah, right now we are working on a framework and really nailing down knowledge and skills and student competencies and everything to prepare learners. And I think that with the assessment portion, I think there's a lot of media literacy, digital literacy, AI literacy that intersects with each other, and it's not all completely new. I hear a lot of folks say it's an evolution, not a revolution. So I think that remains true for part of the assessment picture. But that's also a little bit further downstream from me right now. So it's not on my immediate radar yet.
Right.
Yeah. I'm wondering how, because I think, my understanding is TUMO really gives students opportunities to take that learning into their own hands and to explore with technologies a lot. And I'm wondering if your students have ideas about when and how to use AI, that might be different from students who don't have that opportunity to really experiment and create with technologies. Because I think, here in the US, it can be so different. But I'm wondering if you have any highlights to share from your work.
Yeah, that's a good, very good question, because when you're talking in the abstract, using AI, et cetera, other than like helping or cheating on homework, the use cases are very limited until you get into a workshop where you're doing filmmaking or graphic design
Mm-hmm.
or music composition. Suddenly you have all these other use cases that are very obvious, kind of creativity with AI. And we had a very nice experience with, I think it was 8 months ago, a filmmaking workshop that used one of these AI tools, the commercial ones, in what we call a learning lab, where they're making a short film, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so at that time, we were worried, is this going to kind of reduce the creativity involved in making a film, because the computer is making it for you at a simplistic level, right? And back then, the software had the real issue with continuity. So the characters that would appear in the first 10, 20 seconds of the film would appear completely differently in the following 10 seconds. And at that time, it was hard to
Hmm.
continuity. So the kids actually used that as a feature. So they came up with the story around how the film was called Falling in Love, how falling in love makes you see the other not as they are, but as you imagine it, or something like that, some concept, which completely justified the characters changing from one scene to the other. So it actually turned out that they used this as a kind of a source of creativity, the constraints brought by AI. And it wasn't at all the case that they were less creative, that the storytelling was any less interesting. They actually were able to make something very quickly, but also something that they would not have made with traditional tools because it was this particular thing. Now, the tools have evolved since then, and now they're very embarrassed if we show that film because they're like,
Oh
oh,
no.
this is so 7 months ago.
Oh
But,
no.
but still, yeah, in the context of creative self-expression, you have a lot more incentive to use AI. You're much more interested in these use cases. And the next time you're in a conversation with somebody's like, is AI conscious? Like you're less interested in those kinds of philosophical topics,
Right.
much more about, uh, is this going to help me achieve my creative goals?
Mhm.
And if not, I'm not interested. If
Yeah.
so, I'm really into it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I really love that example because it's exactly the point that you mentioned. We're all talking about cheating and assignments and then what, but we need to get past that and to really think more about, okay, what situations are we putting learners in to do their best work? And to even consider that cheating stuff like not even worth my time,
Right.
right? That
Right.
there's better stuff to do.
But look, I mean, at TUMO, we have these
Hmm.
no's, right? We have no exams, no entrance requirements, no grades, etc. That's not the
Hmm.
case in schools, right? The way schools
Right.
motivation is often by these kinds of competitive or control-oriented mechanisms. And
Right.
AI is making it increasingly harder to use those tools because you can cheat, quote unquote.
Hmm.
Um, and so I'm wondering if you agree that AI is really putting a lot of stress on traditional education, that it wasn't sustainable to begin with. Now it's becoming obvious that maybe it's not sustainable and it's going to create a crisis, some kind of creative disruption that
Hmm.
might change school systems in the long term.
I think you're spot on, and I think it's something we've known for a long time, but there hasn't been really this catalyst to push change a certain way. I think that even in developing our AI literacy framework, something that I really care about is emphasizing a creative process, emphasizing that this might just be a starting point and you can refine, you can iterate, you can do more with what has been kind of generated for you. I think having gone to a school for a few years that didn't have grades, where it was just based on credit. So, if you wanted a higher grade, you would have to do a supplementary project. So, to show that you were really invested in the topic. And that made you think twice about, okay, well, do I want this top graded math because I really care about this project that I have to do in the real world scenario? Or do I just want this high grade in math because I want to go home with a high grade in math? And
Right.
that type of thinking was, a little bit different for a school environment to be in. So I was lucky to have that experience, and that has, you know, I hope that we can give students similar thought processes about, okay, well, what am I good at? Where are my interests? How do I want to spend my time? Which isn't to say they should be choosing every single thing that they're learning all the time, but that we can present things differently, and maybe AI gives us a way to do that now.
Mhm. About 2 years ago, Pat Longcredit, the
Hmm.
.org founder, was at a TUMO conference that we organized around AI in education. And one of the statistics he shared was that a little over 50% of US high schools do any kind of like algorithmic thinking or computer science related teaching.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if that's changed, but also if the next time we talk to him, it'll be more about only X% are doing AI based or teaching AI or something like that. Do you think that's going to be a thing of AI entering the curriculum? Because in Armenia, for example, several years ago, we were very proud that we teach chess in high schools, which I personally find very weird. But now it's AI. So we're going to teach
Okay.
AI to all the kids. Is that something you guys think makes sense?
I think so. And I mean, that is part of the goal of our work is to create, again, practical materials for educators to use in any part of the curriculum. I think AI is changing the way we think about information and the way that we look at sources on the internet. I mean, a Google search today and that the process, I mean, I'm a researcher, the process of doing research now is so different from how it was a year ago, where,
Mhm.
for myself, I'm used to going back through sources and evaluating, okay, what does the abstract say? Do I want to look more at this? What are the conclusions and implications here from this paper or from this article? But now if I type something in Google, there's already a summary for me. It gives me a few key points. How are we going to make sure that students are still going through the materials, deciding if it works for their context, deciding if they want to do that? I see that as an essential skill in a social studies class, for example, or in a civics class, especially when we look at elections and cybersecurity on a global scale. So I think the biggest, you know, area of improvement is really showing teachers where they can fit it in. I think people are torn on whether there should be an AI class or if it should be kind of throughout the curriculum. And I think it's part of our lives every day. And I almost think that it should be woven through with these examples that we're living and experiencing all the time.
So we worry, I don't, but articles in the New York Times will have you worry about kids are not reading anymore. Not just
Mm,
kids, young people in college are not reading anymore. Uh,
mhm.
I feel like we're going to read less and less because of AI. I read less now than I did a year ago because I give the PDFs to what is it called? The Note.lm or
Notebook LM.
Notebook
Hmm.
LM, and it just does a blog post, and I listen to it in the cars.
Hmm.
Um, do you think we're gonna lament the reading days? Is that, or are you okay with us people reading less?
Well, I'm not okay with people reading less. I think I can think about a lot of tools that offer convenience that change our daily behaviors. Like I personally, I don't know if your students and the teenagers will relate to this, but if I ever go to my friend's house, I never knock on the door. I never ring the doorbell. I always just text them that I'm outside. And so, you know, there is a doorbell. There is a door that I can knock. I don't have to send this text message. It's pretty I'm not proud of this that I do this when I arrive at my friend's house. But it is what happens when technology makes something convenient and accessible. I think that it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about the processes of learning and really falling in love with learning and seeing yourself as a learner that, you know, making sure that reading is also used to introduce new worlds and new ways of thinking and new contexts and cultures to students. And again, reevaluating what curriculum are we presenting and how are students engaging with that. I think students are also participating in so many activities and groups and have a lot of life going on outside of school and especially in university settings with work and families and living on your own. And so I wonder, I think when I was looking at like the Atlantic article about students reading, um, what other factors are at play that where students are deprioritizing the amount of time that they're spending reading, right? When there is a tool that makes it accessible to them, that they're going to use that strategically in their lives. Maybe they are still reading fiction outside. I hope they're still reading. I think we should continue to teach reading, absolutely. But it's an example of where if a tool is going to make something convenient and accessible, I don't blame someone for exploring how that could be the case.
Right.
But again, like with coding, as long as you have the knowledge, as long as you have some level of expertise so that you can decide where you're crossing a boundary line or when your interactions are just being handed to you versus when you're really thinking and engaging with it critically, that's really important as well. Can you tell me about your AI learning coach and some highlights from that experience and development?
Right. So we are developing AI agents in a couple of ways. One of them is an AI learning coach, which is not an AI tutor. It doesn't teach subject matters. It's like almost a curriculum coach where, because especially the TUMO curriculum is or program, I should say, it is very malleable. You can create personal learning paths in literally billions of different permutations. Different students have different interests. They go at different speeds. There are resource availabilities, like is there a vacancy in a workshop or is it full? I can't get into things like that. They're prerequisites. So in order to get into what we call a learning lab, that's pretty advanced, you have to have previously done like level 2 of coding or something like that. So we have, for many years now, have a piece of software we call the TUMO Path, which generates personal learning plans for you. Now we're trying to replace that with a conversational interface, which is a virtual coach that's helping you and negotiating with you, almost sometimes pushing you a little bit to decide what to do next and to know where you're going with that. So, for example, to manage towards a goal that you're really excited about. It might tell you something like, look, if you want to make this learning lab, you might want to maybe postpone this robotics workshop that you're going into and go into the filmmaking workshop because that's a prerequisite. And then you notice that 2 months later, it's offered again, things like that. And it's very much my experience with especially liberal arts schools in the US, universities, that it sounds like you have a lot of choice. But then in sophomore year, you realize, oh, I should have taken that microbiology 101.
Yep. Yep.
And no one told you, right?
Yep.
So
Oh, I know that experience.
so you can't do the scenario planning, and the learning coaches
Mhm.
will help you do that in a conversational way. That's one way we're implementing AI in our curriculum.
Nice. I love it. That's that's real. That is a real problem that I've been through and confusion that I've experienced in my life. So I appreciate that it's really grounded in that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that too more because we have the choice is even much more granular than you would have in a university course catalog.
Mhm.
It becomes even more important to do that, right?
Mm.
Yeah, so that's one of the ways we're implementing the AI agents into our program.
How have you seen, like, I spent a lot of time thinking about critical thinking for students and developing the right critical thinking skills. I'm wondering how you've experienced changes with talking about critical thinking or teaching kids critical thinking. If that's, is AI the reason that we're changing how we emphasize critical thinking, or have you found that it happens anytime you just introduce kids to technologies and give them these opportunities to be creative?
So one thing we've discovered and become part of our kind of pedagogy
Mm.
is that we realize that what we value most, we teach a lot of technical skills. So
Mhm.
kids, when they leave TUMO, they're pretty good at things like motion graphics and coding and things like that. But we don't really care about that as a fundamental level. What we care about is the higher order kind of core aptitudes of
Mm.
autonomous learning, self-confidence, communication, leadership mindset, all those nice things. But we found that teaching those directly, even critical thinking, we don't know how to do that. What we know how to do is create project-based, challenging environments where you develop those skills. They become kind of an emerging phenomenon of dealing with these projects or dealing with a group setting.
Mm.
So we put kids in situations where critical thinking becomes a very valuable skill in order to make that video game, basically.
Mm.
And so in that sense, I think the emergence of AI, that kind of approach, I think, to fostering core competencies is a little more immune to AI
Yeah.
than, let's say, a more procedure-based approach, which, as I said, was obsolete to begin with, but now we're really feeling it with AI replacing some of those tricks that we teach
Right.
students how to do. Yeah.
Right. You've already mentioned like TUMO student projects and all of the wonderful things they're creating and even how their creative visions have changed. But is there anything else that you would say they're already really good at when it comes to AI? Something that is like unique to the TUMO vibe or the TUMO students?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it's so new to them that sometimes they have the same concerns
Mm.
and misgivings about AI, sometimes even more so than we do. So, for example, they worry about is they really wanted to learn to draw, for example, right? They're passionate about learning to draw, and suddenly that has become a bit devalued. So they're disappointed that this thing they were excited about might not be as valuable as it would have been when it was a kind of a craft that you had to hone, etc.
Right.
So no, I think we're all in the same boat. I was telling somebody the other day, we're doing this AI Teams conference. And one way to think about it is since teens and adults know pretty much the same thing about AI, which is not much, might as well put teens like and in the lead, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they have a leg up. I also don't think adults do. I think we're gonna
Mm.
kind of feel our way into this. What the skills we want them to have, though, all of us to have, is this ability to be curious and not intimidated and not mystify AI so that you can keep up and again, not be delegated to being a consumer, right?
Yeah.
There's almost this
Yeah.
event horizon of it's going so fast that at some point you can't catch up and you're stuck in this consumer state. That's what we
Right.
want. Yeah,
Right. Program or be programmed.
exactly. That's a good one. That's a t-shirt right
Yeah.
there. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Let you go, but I really enjoyed this. And again, hope to meet in person one day.
Likewise. Likewise. I'm planning to visit.
All right. Bye now.